Jen, I would like to switch gears to a few questions regarding IT, ERP, and digital transformation specifically. And so I guess my first question in that regards is, from your experience, what are the crucial elements for integrating IT and ERP systems during transformational ventures?
Yes, I've been through actually a very large SAP initiative that was implemented in 33 months, unheard of, all of HR, finance, supply chain, and manufacturing. And I was part of the leadership team that enabled that. So I got to see from the
Mm.
ground up what it takes. And there was a lot it took. But what were also some of the best practices that allowed us to do that? Because there are horror stories out there around ERP implementations and IT transformation in general. So the first thing is, from my experience, the number one thing to do is be willing to adopt new processes based on the best practices that's already built into the system versus hanging on or just migrating your legacy processes over. Because the fastest and the smoothest ERP implementation and IT transformation in general was one that we adopted what I call vanilla processes, vanilla approach. Basically, try to use it out of the box. A lot of these platforms, whether it's ERP or if you look at IT transformation in general, a lot of these platforms are built that it's highly configurable. So it's highly configurable. However, look at simplifying what you have first before migrating it over. I'll give you one example of product SKUs. And this is actually a very enlightening example where if you look at organizations and their product SKUs and their part SKUs, it's typically a mess. And you might think, well, that's just a small thing. Why do we care about that? Where product SKUs impact how you sell, it impacts how you price. It also impacts ultimately, of course, your revenue. And if you don't take the effort upfront to simplify something as critical as that, but also as you might think of it as a small piece of the puzzle, as that, it will impact your ability to sell. So in one organization that I was a PMO leader on, they had legacy processes from when they were primarily a hardware focused company to they went through a transformation and then sold themselves as a software focused company. And this is a $2 billion company, so not a small company by any means. Well, their processes, their master data, their product SKUs were based on the fact that they were a hardware company. So their product SKUs reflected the fact that they were a hardware based company. This is how they priced, this is how they sold, this is how they manufacture their products was based on the hardware. Well, after going through this transformation to a software-based company, they had problems in selling the products because now they were trying to sell software as a reoccurring subscription model. And if you were a hardware-based company with hardware SKUs and you haven't changed those yet, you haven't truly migrated those over into new processes, that's where the stumbling block is. So the short answer is that simplify your process, go vanilla, and then also take a look at fundamentally the small things that make a huge difference. Things like product SKUs, because that affects how you price, sell, manufacture, and ultimately distribute your product.
I like that, Jen. That was a great example. I appreciate that. Accurate and timely data is crucial. I mean, clearly, but adapting new processes and disciplines, even if simplified, which means change, can take time. So, how do you balance operational continuity with large scale digital transformations in rapidly growing or merging entities? We see that a lot in our world, in the merger and acquisition, the private equity world. It's very typical to be in an environment that's just quite rapidly growing, with a lot of mergers and acquisitions. But how do you balance that operational continuity with the large scale digital transformations or ERP transformations or implementations?
I think the best analogy that I heard is to allocate the team to maintain your old jalopy while you're building your new Ferrari. So, what does that mean? Yes, you want to ensure operational continuity, but set aside and allocate a separate team to do that. And hopefully it's a minimal team because you really want to focus on moving the needle forward on the innovation, on the digital transformation, on the ERP, which is it was the largest of any organization that I've been at. ERP is always the largest investment that you have to make as an organization in order to grow and thrive in the next 3 to 5, 10 years. It's not something that you want to just do from a side of the desk type of a model, but you want to really invest in that. And the only way to
Yeah.
invest in that is to set aside a dedicated team to do that.
Yeah.
I have a 3S model that I go by when I assess, well, what's necessary to start. So a lot of times we only focus on the start. Where should we start as a new initiative or new project? But we don't think about what should we stop and then what should we minimally sustain. But if you start thinking about your operational continuity, do you just start items or are you intentionally stopping or just making a decision to sustain? Same thing with your large scale digital transformations. Are you just starting or do you make intentional decisions to stop or sustain? If you take a internal portfolio approach on rationalizing all those investments, I think that will give you more of a holistic picture that you can really set aside the right investment in terms of human resources, in terms of financial resources on things like building your new Ferrari, which is your ERP or digital transformation.
That's good. And certainly, Jen, this idea that you mentioned of having checks and balances and business intelligence, what we call quote unquote insurance, it needs to be a part of your game plan with intent. So part of this, when you're talking about large transformational change, whether it's IT or certainly ERP, and this idea of operational continuity, the idea, that you shared with a deliberate team that is focused on that idea, I think is incredibly valuable and important insight. There's no magic wands or perfection when you go live, and there will always be a productivity dip. It's a natural and proven part of such a large scale ERP change project. And so I think just being very diligent about understanding that and having the mechanisms in place to what extent you may or may not need that plan depends on how well you plan throughout your implementation process to begin with. But just the idea, like, as you illustrated, the example of having a team dedicated to ensuring operational continuity, I think is incredibly insightful. So thank you for that. Well, let me piggyback off that question, Jen. And in the context of transformational ventures, what role does IT governance play in ensuring successful outcomes? And maybe Jen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe think about it in terms of IT or ERP governance, right? So for me, when you say, develop a dedicated team to ensure operational continuity, for me, that's a bit of not only insurance, but it's kind of a form of ERP governance, right? So in the context of transformational ventures, what role does IT governance play in ensuring successful outcomes?
Yes, as the chair and lead author for PMI's governance practice guide, I happen to know a thing or two about governance. But let me kind of just simplify everything that's in the practice guide into the fact that governance really plays 4 main functions. One is oversight, the second is control, the third is decision making, and the fourth is integration. So when I think of governance, and a lot of people are confused about the word governance, what does that mean really? Is it a committee that gets together and meets, or are we reviewing certain things? So think of the oversight one as it's not just status reports. It really should be more of a T-based exception management model. So what I mean by that is if you're getting data that says a project is green, well, that's something that you don't need to focus on, because my expectation as the PMO, and I think every leader should have this expectation, is that projects should be green. We had a plan, we're executing to the plan. What we do need to focus on are the things that are in red or yellow, and then really drill down to the root cause and say, what are we doing about it? And who needs help? And what do I need to do to get that to green? So it's not just the project manager that's responsible for doing that, but as leaders, as part of the overall governance team, we're all collectively responsible for driving that particular project into green. The second thing is around control. So control means that when thresholds are exceeded, and I like to use maybe a 5 to 10% threshold, and you could put these thresholds on things like budget, you could put them on resources, definitely scope comes into the picture, but also the value. So when you put these thresholds on that, and keep in mind the 5 or 10% also empowers the team to solve some of these problems by themselves too, because that gives them some leeway to adjust as needed. But then the most important thing is that's your early warning indicator. You don't need to wait all the way at the end when the project has been delivered to say, whoops, this project failed. They didn't deliver, not only on time, on budget, on scope, but they actually didn't deliver the value. So put in these thresholds, and then that's your control function for the governance team. So again, your overall governance team should be collectively responsible for monitoring these and then also actioning these items.
Yep.
The third thing is around decision making. So I mentioned my 3S: start, stop, and sustain. I truly believe the reason we have resource issues, as an example, is that we're starting too many projects. We're starting too many initiatives. We haven't intentionally stopped anything. And that's where you get teams that are overworked and overwhelmed, and then they, of course, burn out, and then that further compounds the problem of not delivering. And then the fourth item is around integration. That's actually a critical function of governance that sometimes we don't think about. But that's ensuring that cross-functional impacts, aka dependencies, are known, they're assessed, and then they're planned for. So there's a part of governance that's actually very active in terms of that cross-functional alignment and then impact analysis.
That is good. So Jen, if I were to summarize your response there, I would say that when it comes to IT governance, it's not just reports and red, yellow, green checkboxes and graphs. It's about effective and proactive exception modeling, threshold control, and appropriate decision making. And I really do like your last point as well, because I do think it's a point that's often missed, and that is the idea of integration and understanding maybe the dependencies amongst the different stakeholder groups. Did I paraphrase that in a way that does your response justice?
Yes, you did. You summarized it perfectly, Jack.
So then, what best practices can you recommend for achieving seamless integration and enhanced value in mergers and acquisitions?
Yes, so I actually have some key advice around this. The first thing is plan and start the integration day one. It's not something that you should put off. All of the companies that I've been an executive at, and some of them had tremendous organic growth, something like 25% year over year, but also they grew a lot through mergers and acquisition. As you know, healthcare is very fragmented, and all of the companies I worked with have gone through tremendous consolidation over the last 10 years, and they continue to go through that because healthcare is not only extremely fragmented, but it's also extremely disruptive. If you think about the regulatory environment, if you think about the data environment and the privacy concerns. So it's extremely, it's a industry that's extremely transformative and also undergoing transformation. So let me give you an example around this. One very well-known large healthcare company acquired a multi-billion-dollar Medicare business that operated in multiple states, but they did not spend any time or resources in integration. And by integration, I mean truly migrating processes, data, systems over, but not a lift and shift. We're really rationalizing what makes sense going forward. How can we align this? And it's not necessarily always adopting the corporate strategy. It can be adopting a brand new process, brand new system, brand new data. Well, they spent no time on integrating this significant Medicare business into their overall core business. And 4 years later, guess what happened? They were sanctioned by the CMS. So CMS is Center for Medicaid and Medi-Cal, essentially the government agency that oversees all of the seniors business, which is the Medicare business, because of substantial failures in their processes and systems. So all of a sudden, this $4 billion business that they acquired and left alone for 4 years because the perception was that it was going well, it was generating revenue. So why spend the time on integration of their processes and systems versus just letting it run itself? Well, these sanctions meant that they couldn't sell or market their product to customers until those issues are fixed. I was part of the PMO that was brought in, so part of the overall leading the overall team that was brought in to fix this. And I can tell you the team worked day and night over 2 years to fix those business processes and systems. And the bottom line here is also that I don't know if they fully recovered, because just last year I read in the news that they were considering divesting their Medicare business, which is a complete 360 from acquiring this Medicare business years ago, because they never fully integrated it. And if you talk to any of the leaders there during the sanction period, which was extremely stressful, as you can imagine, for everybody that was involved, if you talk to any of the leaders in the organization, they will say that their number one regret is not integrating the systems and processes on day one, that they just left it alone, they let it go, and then now they had to deal with the sanctions, remediating the sanctions, trying to get it back on track. And again, I don't believe they fully recovered from that. So the biggest lesson here is make the investment up front to assess and integrate the business process and system to what it should be. Don't just leave it running by itself.
Oh, Jen, that's a great example, and frankly, that's a topic that gives me goosebumps, and we could discuss for hours. The idea of data consolidation into one ERP platform is common during mergers and acquisitions, and we have provided a great deal of guidance over the years for many projects that have fallen short in that exact area. And we currently have multiple projects where we're supporting clients with this. And as you said, Jen, I mean, plan day one, especially with data integration, mapping, validation, and so forth. I mean, you've probably heard the phrase that it's the longest pole in the tent. So the idea of starting, if you have a project kickoff today, then that means tomorrow, 8 a.m., you're starting your process of data migration. So I think that was great. Listening to you talk about that experience is something that we see often, unfortunately. And Jen, I would say from a PM tactical perspective, again, so that's a common concern, and it's a heavy lift sometimes, and especially if you have, if an organization has bang, multiple acquisitions in a short period of time, and their goal is to strategically bring all of the platforms into one common platform, that's a pretty important item that you don't want to miss. So great example.
Absolutely. I actually share your approach to starting the integration on day one. I think it's an investment that really pays off at the end of the day. You don't want to wait until you have to do it or you're forced to do it. You want to make sure that you're planning for it and you're intentionally embarking on that journey.